company attorneys cross-examined the interveners, PSC President Billy Joe Camp announced that the commission has drafted an order opposing the FCC's proposal to deregulate the telephone industry. The order is similar to the one filed by the PSC in Louisiana, except it includes all telephone companies regulated by the Alabama PSC. Camp says the commission wants the FCC to reconsider its action that deregulates what he called the best operating telephone service in the world. Camp says the industry isn't broken, so why fix it? Responding to the PSC's decision, South Central Bell's Vice President Carlton Baker says the proposed action to keep Bell from entering the competitive market is not only unfair, but isn't in the public interest. Baker conceded, however, that deregulation could cause customers to pay substantially higher rates. Commissioner Jim Folsom Jr. added that public service commissions all over the country are disagreeing with the FCC's proposal and are taking similar action. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the PSC.
Item consideration, net present value of
Mr. Cap, could I ask, does it apply to the other one?
At this time.
Governor James has spent most of his day here at the Hilton Hotel in Mobile on a working trip to tell Alabamians how he wants to make state government better. This morning he briefly outlined his reform package to a group of supporters. Then at noon, a little tougher audience joined the governor for a Dutch treat lunch. Senators, representatives, and a large number of local elected officials listened to Governor James's proposal to make the legislative budget process, as he puts it, the only show in town. James wants the legislature to pass a bill allowing the people to vote on what is called an isolation budget bill. It would require the governor to submit a budget at the beginning of the regular session and would prohibit any bills from becoming law until the budgets are passed by the 15th legislative day. Added to that, Governor James says he wants Alabama to return drafting budgets every 2 years rather than annually, as the state has done for the last half a decade. Because James feels the budgets fall victim to special interest pressures, reforming the budget process is tops on his campaign list. But not far behind is education. The governor wants to strengthen the Alabama Commission on Higher Education, a proposal the governor couldn't get passed earlier this year. The governor is armed with a half a dozen staff members, several department heads, and lots of literature to hand out, which outlines his proposals. On the back of each sheet, the governor has conveniently put the area legislators' names and telephone numbers, hoping that those he campaigns to will, as he suggested, put pressure on the legislators to support the reform measures. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
You're watching Tyrone Means and Troy Massey on the visit to the county courthouse last week. The two were the subject of intense discussion by other lawyers here on that day. As a matter of fact, they had the local and state legal community buzzing, many with quiet indignation. Means and Massey broke with tradition by putting ads in a Montgomery newspaper, telling the public their services and prices. That's unheard of in this state, even though a U.S. Supreme Court decision says it's okay. Massey doesn't see it as a break with the traditional way of attracting clients.
In a sense, it is a departure from tradition. In another sense, it's an extension of tradition.
At first, the two partners didn't agree about advertising.
Initially, I was against it. It's Troy's idea. He's the one who nurtured it. I wanted to develop the traditional kind of practice by just getting yourself known, getting the total track record, and hopefully clients would start following your ways, sort of like starving the first couple of years.
Another factor that encouraged the ads was that it was a good business tool used in other fields.
We researched it carefully, both from a legal angle and from a business prospect. Remember, we had to determine whether or not this was the right kind of market area to advertise in. We didn't go into this thing foolishly, just advertising will get us some business.
I see.
But we did do some thorough research, and we've looked at how legal clinics are operating across the country.
Means and Massey say somebody had to make the first move, and they think it will become a trend in the legal field.
There have been some folks who already called and said good luck, and I assume that they were not even in a sarcastic manner.
Oh, I see.
And I assume that there will be others who will advertise following us. I think a lot of lawyers were waiting for somebody else to start it. And
Do you really think so?
Yes, to that extent, I think we're pioneers in this area. There are a lot of people who think that lawyers are too mysterious. They want to call in and ask what the fees were for certain services. And we were initially taught, well, you don't give fees out over the phone. You get them in the office and then talk about it. Well, it shouldn't be nothing mysterious about fees. If when you go to a store to buy a product, it's clearly marked what they're worth or what their value is. And I think the same thing should apply to legal fees.
The offices will be open one night each week and a half day on Saturdays. Means and Massey say these changes are designed to benefit potential clients who can't leave work to go to see a lawyer during what is normally called regular law office hours. There's been encouraging response from the ads. The young lawyers say local bar members have reserved public comment. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News reporting.
Communication regulates, I think, between 20 and 25% of our business.
Back to the competition. And let's say, as a national investment advisor, you feel that the company's rate will be granted.
We have the youngest Nicholas boy will be here, Gary Nicholas. He's in the 11 and 12 year age group. We don't have anybody, say, of the stature of Wayne Player, Gary's son, but we do have a real strong field. We have probably 50 or 60 boys that are capable of winning this tournament. We would like to see more people come out and watch the tournament. I think that maybe a lot of them don't know that they are welcome out here and there's no charge, and we would like for them to come out and see these boys play because this is one of the top 4 junior tournaments in the world.
It's called acceleration, and if the putter, you can take the putter back and this far and still accelerate it through the ball. Or you can take it back that far and de-accelerate it. I practice by taking it back as far as I possibly can and accelerate it through the ball like that. If I can take it back that far, get my hands waist high going back and still have it picking up speed as it goes through the ball, then I know under pressure I can take it back 4 or 5 inches and accelerate it through the ball.
So actually the contact is just incidental. You're trying to stroke the ball.
That's right. I want the ball to roll with overspin. When I catch a lip, I want that ball rolling down towards the bottom of the hole. I don't want it spinning one way or the other where it'll lip out.
Senate, where it was passed in about 3 days, but the budget that the Senate passed was not a fiscally responsible budget. And I mean, it was intended not to be, because rather than try to work out all of the differences, the goal of the Senate was to expedite putting the budget. The next day we'll meet to hear from representatives. Traditionally, it has been the Senate's position that the governor recommends a budget, nobody does anything until that happens. Then the House considers the budget first, and nobody does anything until that happens. Well, that's going to change in Alabama Senate because we're going to have a responsible budgetary process, and we're not going to sit around and wait for other people to decide when they wish to take action.
I would ask that the city attorney.
The price is $10,500 an acre. That's development property. It calls for 2 independent appraisals. You operate, the council can set.
You arrived, you and your men started searching the building, the burning apartment. The heat was so intense, everyone had to come out, but you went back inside to search again and found the occupant. Property owned by registered mail and that's all.
Lieutenant, if anybody hadn't ever stuck your nose in a hot fire, they don't know what you did. But for those that have, appreciate it all the more because it took a lot of guts to go back in there.
What happened to the budget?
For Governor James, it was his second day of coffee in the morning with supporters and lunch with area elected officials. The purpose is to gain support for a number of reform proposals he hasn't been able to get through the legislature merely by making his pitch to the individual legislators. James says his real enemy is not the legislators, but the system, a system that has been created over many years of tradition.
And when you restructure to expose that system, she squats, just like an old hen, just squats. And the legislature squats with it.
During the earlier sessions, James did meet with newspaper editors and broadcast news directors, and he's doing the same this year, but he's added 2 new groups, the local elected officials and educators.
We gotta ask you to write and go see your senators and your House members. So very essential that your voice be heard. Otherwise, this will not become a reality.
Governor James is in effect lobbying for his bills, which he still contends are part of the mandate he was given just more than 2 years ago. The governor is also hoping to use next year's elections as leverage, saying what better time for House and Senate members to publicly take a stand on what the governor calls basic fundamental reforms. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Well, there was a flurry about the...
The content of the governor's speech is much the same as that given to civic leaders and supporters in the Mobile area yesterday, reform. The governor told supporters in Montgomery this morning about his proposal to isolate the budget process during the regular session, to return to biennial budgeting, restructure the Commission on Higher Education, and redefine the mission of the State Board of Education. But sprinkled in among those issues, the governor has mentioned 2 other items that have been shelved for some time. One, an earmarking of state tax dollars, a proposal that met with defeat during the regular session, but an issue the governor's spokesman, Wendy Level, says James still wants to pass, perhaps during one of the several special sessions the governor has said he would call. The other issue is reforming the state retirement program, a proposal the governor couldn't get anyone to introduce for him during the regular session. Other tidbits of information from the governor include some of his ideas on how to spend the $450 million in oil lease money. The governor has talked about using some of the money to float a bond issue to finance home construction and using some to build a 55-foot channel in the port of Mobile, a move Level says is dependent on congressional support of the Tennessee-Tombigbee waterway. The governor also mentioned that Kentucky is interested in becoming a partner in the state docks at Mobile, a proposal James says he likes at this time. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Well, there was a flurry about the education.
At issue was a proposed change in the budget to keep any of the special education trust funds money from going to the legislature. Teague says the board must work with the legislature since it has the final say on whether or not a budget passes. Board member Dr. Harold Martin disagrees. He says the board should vote its convictions and not worry about the legislature. AEA Executive Secretary Dr. Paul Hubbard told the board he's also opposed to the legislature getting any money from the Special Education Trust Fund, but he called it practical politics.
I think everybody has their own opinion of what the budget ought to contain. The particular issue was whether or not the legislature would be funded out of the Educational Trust Fund. And obviously the legislature is not going to work without pay. They are going to be funded.
Hubbard says the budget is most beneficial to grades K through 12 and told board members that's where their concern should be. Dr. Teague, however, denied that it was an issue of politics.
Because this budget was developed over a period of time, ever since the session ended last May, in fact. And the board was aware of the problems we had. And the state board's priorities are elementary, secondary, vocational, and two-year colleges. And this budget deals with those matters. So I don't see any politics involved in it.
Teague says even though the vote was not unanimous, he thinks the 3 members who voted against the new budget only objected to the amount the legislature will get. Hubbard says the budget approval is a very positive move for the board. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News. Board member John Tyson was the lone member voting against the program, saying it requires teachers to participate, but there's no system to check on how well they're doing. The new program is the result of 2 years of testing in 8 Alabama school systems. David Jones, Sumter County Assistant School Superintendent, says the program proved effective in his system, and he thinks it will help education systems across the state. He says the new system differs from past in-service programs. Before, although all school systems were required to have in-service programs, each school designed and regulated its own. Now, Jones says the new program provides specific guidelines for what in-service training should be, and the same rules will apply to all systems in the state. State Superintendent of Education Dr. Wayne Teague says he recognizes the need for such a program and thinks it will be effective.
That different old program, I think it's strengthened basically the same points. It does require all people to participate. It provides that the state board and state department will do a little more monitoring, I think. In other words, we review the programs of individuals and of systems, that we would attempt to make sure that these programs were in fact being carried out.
Still, some board members remain concerned that the in-service sessions will not be watched closely enough, and they think without even closer regulation, the new program will be no more effective than those of the past. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
One of Dr. Legler's methods for computing the rate of return figure is the estimate of future bond costs added to the estimated risk premium. Dr. Legler concludes the telephone company should be earning a reasonable 13.5% to 15% rate of return on equity. The company is seeking 16%. During the cross-examination, company attorney Will Booker showed Dr. Legler a comparison of estimates on future bond costs he computed for other utility companies. Booker pointed out that Legler had underestimated by what he called a conservative 20% margin for several of the company's cost of equity. Booker also showed that Dr. Legler's estimate of future bond yields for the telephone company, plus what he described as his historical 20% margin of error, added to the estimated risk premium, computes to nearly the same cost of equity range the company is seeking. Dr. Legler says many forecasts are being missed because of federal regulations and fluctuating interest rates, and he says the issue of fair rate of return is still largely judgmental. Governmental officials are expected to testify tomorrow on what they think the company's rate of return should be. The officials are expected to recommend a 13% to 15% rate of return for the telephone company. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the PSC.
Well, first of all, it's a tribute to me that the mayor would want to get rid of me, because I think that I have been a good council member, and the mayor really wants someone who will rubber stamp his proposals. And it's no surprise to me, I've said this all along, that the mayor's prime concern was to try to get rid of a black person on the city council, and me in particular. And of course the mayor confirmed what I had been saying. You will recall originally that the mayor said he had been over backwards not to do anything to my district. And yesterday the mayor came back and changed that tune. Aside from the mayor being a habitual liar, I think that it also shows that the mayor is disregarding the covenant that we entered. And I think that's more important than anything else. If I, and along with our Representative Langford and Representative Holmes and the rest of us who entered the agreement, if we were good enough to enter an agreement with the mayor, then the mayor is honor bound to uphold it. Whatever else happens, the mayor ought to be a man of his word. But as I've said all along, the mayor is not. I said before, and I say now, I don't trust him any more than I trust the Russians.
Alabama Christian College regrets the leaving of Coach John Hazelup, but we are happy to announce the coming of Dr. Jack Rhodes to be with us in the Department of Physical Education. He will be our new basketball coach. He's a man of great experience, and we look forward to his being with us on campus. He has an impressive record in the area of basketball, and no doubt he will continue this as he works with the fine athletes that we have in the basketball program here.
The 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals has ordered the Army Corps of Engineers to halt construction on the Chain of Lakes segment of the Tenn-Tom waterway. In issuing its injunction, the court cited the Army Corps for what it called blatant violations of environmental regulations. The order says that major changes in project construction have drastically altered the environmental impact of the Tenn-Tom waterway. The Court of Appeals wants the Army Corps to submit a new environmental impact statement taking into account all new developments since 1971. Until the statement is issued, construction of the Tenn-Tom is in limbo.
We don't have any indication that it would stop work on the entire project. I'm very hopeful that it does not, because there are many thousands of people there, employed there, and it would put a lot of people out of work if in fact that was the case. We don't think that's the case. We don't have anything to indicate that that's the case.
The injunction comes at a critical time for Tenn-Tom. With over 55% of the waterway completed and 1982 funding pending before the Congress, Tenn-Tom is once again in the spotlight.
Investors say money market mutual funds are a boon to savers as well as the economy. They say it's a safe, quick way to get a high rate of return on an investment. But this rapid growth of the money market has taken banks by surprise.
Banks, especially savings institutions, have been protected from competition for many years, protected from other institutions. As a result, they felt that they had a privileged situation.
Many officials are against the money market. At a time when the president is calling for deregulation, some in the banking and savings and loan industries are asking for additional regulation of the money market mutual funds.
The answer is not to put more controls on money market funds, because even if you made them non-economic as investments, people would just go to some other investment which would pay them a return more consistent with our present economic conditions.
Many say the answer should be deregulation of banks and savings and loan institutions rather than more regulations on the money market. U.S. Senator Paula Hawkins of Florida says one alternative is to permit banks and S&Ls to offer higher interest rates. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Governor James was giving his reform pitch to more than 200 school superintendents, principals, teachers, and parents, much the same pitch he's been giving to civic leaders this week. But he spent a little extra time explaining how his reform measures would help identify the problems in education funding, specifically the special interest groups and the haze that he says surrounds the drafting of the budgets. But the governor had some opposition. University of Montevallo President James Vickery. Vickery wanted support from the governor in finding more money for all education. That led to a tongue-lashing from the governor about the mismanagement of state dollars by universities and the excess of two-year and technical dollars that could be channeled into better quality education, not costing the state one tax dollar more. But later, Vickery said he felt much of the mismanagement the governor had mentioned had already been addressed. The governor has apparently adopted another reform. He suggested all PTA members contribute at least $5 a year to create a children's lobbying group able to do battle with the likes of AEA and the university lobbyist for state dollars just to represent school children. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
To speak out with respect to cost.
Any objection you bring up?
I tell you, sometimes I'm questioning what you say. Yes, do something wrong. I said, well, I got
$3 million sitting in the bank for the last 7 or 8 years that was supposed to have gone into the
Take care of call roll on the adoption resolution number 1.
The Fifth Circuit opinion seemed to say, Norman, that it was a matter of convenience rather than need. Well, I don't agree with that, but even if that's so, I thought you were supposed to make things convenient for law enforcement when they had an investigation going on, particularly a grand jury. And I can't understand why the federal courts want to make it inconvenient for a grand jury. I'm under a disadvantage. There's a court order up there forbidding me to speak about what went on in Judge McFadden's chambers. I can't even tell you who was there, what parties were represented, what lawyers were there, what the issues were, what the documents were, what the evidence was. But I can tell you this, there's a lot more involved than just names of witnesses. But in any event, we're trying to see if it's worth going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We're trying to see whether or not we can get the gag order lifted.
Finance advisor Woodrow Dooley is representing the consumer interests of the federal government. Based on his analysis of South Central Bell, Alabama's financial situation, Dooley is recommending that the PSC grant a $16.5 million increase. That's substantially less than what the company is seeking and a little more than half of what the Attorney General's office is recommending. Because the government is the largest single customer of the Bell system, it intervenes when telephone companies seek additional revenues. By testifying at rate increase hearings, officials estimate on a nationwide average, they save the government more than $1 billion each year. Officials say the Bell system is the best operating telephone service in the country, but in seeking increases, it doesn't need a larger profit than it's asking for. So the government makes recommendations that may or may not influence commissions.
We found over time that commissions read our work and take it seriously, so we know we have some impact, but we don't quite know precisely how much.
Langsom says governmental agencies are neither for nor against telephone deregulation as proposed by the FCC. He says if certain parts of the industry are deregulated, agencies will start buying telecommunication services from various competing firms. Kim Davis, WSFA, TV News.
There are 450 names on this list. The first 400 are to be released the 24th of this month. The remaining 50 are to be given accelerated parole dates. In the order, Judge Varner cites the state for grossly inadequate facilities in the prison system. He says the continued overcrowding in the state's prisons constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, and the only valid relief is to release a substantial number of the inmates. Varner hasn't identified which prisons the inmates are in or what their sentences are, but he says those on the list have only a few months remaining on their sentences. Governor James is in Anniston as part of his road trip, but he issued a statement through his press secretary, Chris Bentz, asking for cooperation from all public officials.
There's a very good possibility that we will find some people on the list that we feel should not be released. But as to this method of trying to correct the problem, no, we will not oppose this method.
But Attorney General Charles Graddick says he will oppose the release. His staff is already working on an appeal and a stay of the order, as well as an alternative method to deal with the problem. Graddick says instead of releasing the inmates, the state should erect tents such as these in Huntsville, Texas. He says it's a viable alternative, one that he's ready to present to an appeals judge. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
With the exception of the governor's proposal to isolate the budget process, the governmental reforms that Governor James is campaigning for this week have been introduced before. House Speaker Joe McCorkadale says the governor has received the support of a majority of the House members on most of his issues in the past, and he expects that support to be there again. But McCorkadale emphasized that the education budget is the main reason legislators need to return to Montgomery.
That's paramount, that's number one, that's the most important in my opinion. And so as long as some of these other measures did not take precedent over that, I will support his idea, and I think most of the measures that he's suggested I can vote for and support.
The Speaker qualified his support by saying many of the governor's ideas are good, but the actual contents of the bill need to be refined to make them, as he puts it, workable. Over on the Senate side, Lieutenant Governor George McMillan claims the duties of his office prevent him from condemning or supporting any proposals.
I do not feel that it is a proper prerogative of this office to get into the business of supporting or opposing legislation. This is a decision that will have to be made by the members of the Alabama Senate.
The governor's road trip continues through next week, at which time he's expected to announce his call for a special session. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Attention has been focused on malathion and the Mediterranean fruit fly control in California. Alabama, the Cooperative Extension Service recommends malathion on feed and food crops, on livestock, pest control, in and around the home, on home gardens. It's used in cities for mosquito control. It's sprayed on lakes and impoundments for mosquito control. It is considered one of our safer chemicals for pest control. It has never appeared on any potentially dangerous list by the Environmental Protection Agency, and because of this and because of the low toxicity, dermal toxicity of this chemical, we consider it one of our safer chemicals.
This training exercise is a once-a-year occurrence, and today, for the first time, Air Force personnel joined the Army for the drill. Commander of the Hanchey Division of Flight Training at Fort Rucker, Lieutenant Colonel John Bradley, says the exercise serves two purposes. Not only does it allow troops to practice with live ammunition, but it demonstrates the ability of the Army to work in mid-intensity battle conditions. 12 helicopters from Fort Rucker and 2 airplanes from the Connecticut Air National Guard fired miniguns, grenade launchers, cannons, and rockets at targets over 3,000 meters away. After the initial barrage of air fire, ground troops were deployed to complete the attack. Bradley says training sessions like these are very helpful in preparing forces for battle. He says it is not often that ground forces, Army aviation, and Air Force teams can get together for this sort of rehearsal. But when they do, it allows them to work simultaneously on the attack maneuvers they are trained with. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News in Fort Rucker.
Well, it's my understanding that the new areas of emphasis in the Justice Department will be in the area of violent crime and also in the area of narcotics trafficking. Now, by saying that, I don't mean that other traditional areas such as organized crime are going to be neglected, and I don't mean to say that the Department of Justice is going to abandon white-collar prosecution, but they have made it clear that a new area of emphasis will be in the area of violent crime and narcotics trafficking.
When this house was placed in Cross Creek last Friday, area residents became outraged because they say it will decrease their property value. According to city records, the modular home's owner, John Cagle, has estimated its value at $28,000, while area residents say their homes are in the $50,000 to $80,000 range. Tonight, those residents met with City Councilman John Starr to ask him what could be done on the matter. Starr says the city's attorney, Bernard Brannon, has determined the house is a temporary structure and is in violation of the plat restriction and the zoning ordinance. Starr says the city will notify Cagle of the violation and ask him to remove the house. He says if the house stays, it could create what he called a dangerous precedent, which could allow modular homes in other areas.
It is my opinion that, and it's the city attorney's opinion, that you should, as property owners, in order to protect your property, that I think you should file suit against John Cagle for violation of the number 10 covenant that we just talked about.
Starr says the city will also file suit against Cagle if necessary. Residents representing 35 households signed a petition saying they're willing to file suit if necessary, and a committee of 3 residents will seek legal advice tomorrow. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
That's it. That's it. We have 899 names on the census start.
Well, you know, something else, some people were telling me that
Dave, that is McDaniel.
Well, give me your question more cost of their service. That's a good idea.
Reports on American workers in numerous industries. Did you study the impact of increase?
There may have been cases in firms that manufacture telephone equipment that have charged that they have lost of business because,
on page 3,
per se, that, as you well know, the federal president, we don't represent any policy-making arm. I don't represent the federal.
On the fifth day of the governor's statewide road trip to stump for support of his reform issues, Governor James was back in Opelika, his hometown. A busy day for the governor, which begins with an early morning coffee with friends and supporters. The governor delivers what has become a well-practiced speech covering his budgetary reform and education reform issues. The governor is using all means possible to get his message out, including regular news conferences in each city, allowing the local media to familiarize themselves with his proposals. Then it's off to the local radio station for an hour-long talk show, which includes an opportunity for listeners to phone in their comments and questions.
Yes, good morning, Governor.
Morning. Good to be back home.
Without any stop, it's a Dutch treat lunch crowd next. This time, the local elected officials are sprinkled in with more supporters and another rendition of his proposals. It's a pace the governor has set for the next week and a half in the hopes he can muster public pressure on the legislature just before calling them back into special session, which is expected in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News in Opelika.
I've seen federal judges challenged before for wrong reasons and for right reasons. And I'd like to see the Attorney General, if he has reservations about any individual on that list, then I would like to see him name that individual and the reasons why, and I'm sure it would be withdrawn. Otherwise, I would like to see the Attorney General get some convictions in this state. There is ample room for crime in high places.
The rap sheets detail the sex and race of the inmates, as well as the prison where they're serving time now and what they were convicted for. But it's slow going for the Department of Corrections. Secretaries are having to go through the list manually because their computer broke down. They say it will be late this evening before the list is complete. Whether the release of the inmates is the best solution or not remains at issue. Today, House Speaker Joe McCorkadale met with Judge Barner just to get a better feel of the situation. He says he doesn't really see any other alternative at this point, but he doesn't agree with the release.
I just cannot see releasing these prisoners back on the public because it could create a severe problem and it could create a danger in some cases.
In response to the Attorney General's appeal, McCorkadell says if past records are any indication, the appeal won't do any good. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
I am in hopes, since the President now is involved in it, and I'm sure the President's involved in it, with the Secretary of Labor being involved in it yesterday, I'm sure that it's going to be settled, at least I feel it's pretty sure it's going to be settled before this week is out. And if they don't, I really don't know where baseball is going to go, unless they settle it and get it over with and get back to the business of playing baseball, entertaining people. That's what it's about.
You think the fans will jump back in now?
I don't think they'll jump back as fast as a lot of them think they will. They're going to be a little selective now in the things they do with their money. They found out after 30, 45 days that they can do other things with their money, and they will do other things with their money. They'll find other entertainment which they found since the strike has been on.
Frank Maston Jr., the executive director of the Alabama Volunteers in Corrections, says he believes forcing inmates to remain in overcrowded prisons is cruel punishment, but he says the release may not solve any problems either.
I think it's clear if work opportunities are not provided for them, then their source of income is going to be pretty much limited to some kind of unlawful activity. And I think that's the important thing that the community must understand and be prepared to deal with, and be willing to deal with it in an effective and positive way.
House Speaker Joe McCorkadell, after meeting with Judge Varner, says he doesn't believe releasing the 400 inmates is the best solution because it could be dangerous. But he says Attorney General Charles Graddick's appeal of the release order probably won't make any difference.
If past records and track records on what's happened is any indication, I think that this order the judge will hold. I hate to say that, but I feel like that's been our past record on that.
Those 400 inmates are scheduled to be set free on the 24th of this month. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Or more rewarding than that, Phil. You can't believe how good it makes me feel. To know I saved a life. Darrell Porter tells people publicly that Don Newcomb saved my life. And he's the only man in my life right now who means something to me. Now, you think that doesn't make me feel good? Bobby Welch to tell people, and Darrell Jackson, and Lou Johnson. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel sad, though, that players had to go to that degree and lose their careers, their lives, their families, in order to make this transition. But it happened, and it's happening, and it's going to continue to happen. I'm sorry it's going to continue to happen, but that's the way it is in our society today, Phil, and it's not going to change.
During almost all of the governor's speeches during this week's statewide campaign, it hasn't been too hard for him to generate excitement and draw some strong supportive applause. But even with a basically identical speech, tonight's audience merely listened. The governor's message was delivered in a hot, muggy, unair-conditioned auditorium, and the teachers, parents, and other educators in the audience didn't reflect that same excitement the governor saw earlier today in two other speeches. What the governor is pushing for is reform, specifically budgetary reform that he says would bring the budgetary process out of the basement and isolate it such that it would be the subject of strong scrutiny. One of the governor's dislikes about the present system is not only the fight among all of the lobbyists for state